creativity. So what we know today is that, as adults, we need play and fun and creativity just as much as we needed it as children. So again, I'm going to invite your listeners to be thinking about, what do I do in my life that involves fun and play? Now, for some people, it's sport, and other people, it's particular clubs, and all that kind of stuff, which is great. But it is very useful to know, what do I do that gives me an outlet for play and creativity and fun, in whatever way that looks like? And if you find that actually there isn't any fun or play or creativity in my life, then I'd be asking you to assess your quality of life. I'd be asking you to really challenge yourself around, what does that feel like? Again, are we allowed to have fun? Are we allowed to have play as adults? I would argue, absolutely. I would argue that it's actually essential that we have fun, that we have timeouts, that we can somehow access our creativity.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. You are listening to Don't Be Afraid to Talk podcast with James. I believe if we are going to affect change, we must go back to the basic, which for me, in essence, is conversations. Talking and listening is key for growth, and I hope our stories will bring us together and we can draw inspiration from each other. Conversation will include topics such as mental and physical health, trauma and its effect, suicidal thoughts, recovery, and well-being. We will continue to raise awareness and offer a different perspective, a mindset or an idea that could inspire you to take charge of your well-being and to grow as a human being.
Thank you for joining us today. You are listening to another episode of Ask the Therapist. And today I am joined by Ciarán, who is going to share some light into some of the questions we have here. Hi, Ciarán. How are you?
Good morning, James. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's great to be here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Do you mind just telling our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, my name is Ciarán Nolan, and I'm a counsellor and psychotherapist. I've been working now for almost 14 years, I think, James, as a counsellor and psychotherapist here in Dublin. And I suppose I've got a big passion for living your best life and for kind of processing and kind of looking at ourselves, really making the most of life and what life has to offer us.
Brilliant. This sounds amazing.
Sounds good.
Amazing. Yeah. Okay, before we kick off, we're just going to play a quick random game, 1 for 1. The way it works is I'll give you a word and you say the first one that comes to your mind.
Okay.
Okay. Simple words, nothing too crazy.
Okay.
First one is childhood.
Fun.
Parenting.
Present.
Adulthood.
Adventure.
Trauma.
Sadness.
And last one, trust.
Gold.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Simple. That's like, I call it icebreaker, just to kind of, okay. I'm going to be cutting out like the
and
pause.
a little bit of a snapshot, James, I think, into my psyche too. So no harm maybe to start with that before we get kicked into our conversation this morning.
So I tried to cut you off or something. get your mind thinking differently.
That's it.
So this is just a question. So I'm going to be editing it anyway. So all this pauses in the middle is fine.
Okay.
So we get going.
Absolutely.
Hi, Ciarán. What is compassionate focus therapy?
Well, compassion-focused therapy, James, was developed by a British clinical psychologist, Professor Paul Gilbert. And we call it kind of referred to as CFT for short, because it's a bit of a mouthful. But essentially, it's an integrated and multi-model approach to psychotherapy that kind of draws on evolutionary, social, developmental and Buddhist psychology, and of course, neuroscience. So it's ultimately a talk therapy, James, and it's become more and more popular in recent times, and certainly more popular here in Ireland today.
And when you say talk therapy, I thought all therapy was talking, sorry.
Yeah, well, so there's different kinds of therapy. So therapy would be, for example, you can have massage therapy, you can have aromatherapy. So psychotherapy and counselling is talk therapy. So it's talking through and having I suppose, a therapeutic relationship with a therapist or counsellor in order to I suppose, look at oneself and maybe work through any difficulties that people have. So there's loads of different kinds of therapies. I mean, you've got occupational therapy and physiotherapy, but specifically CFT is about talk therapy. So it's in the school of psychotherapy and counselling.
Okay, brilliant.
And I suppose CFT's key concerns, James, is really around, I suppose, helping people to develop and work with experiences of inner warmth, safeness and soothing. So, what people might ask you would be kind of, what is compassion? So I think that's a kind of a good place to start. And the Dalai Lama offers us a really nice definition of compassion. And that's, compassion is a sensitivity to the suffering of self and others with a deep wish and commitment to relieve that suffering. So when we think of therapy, why do any of us engage in therapy? Often it's because we want to relieve some element of suffering. And in talk therapy, we're looking at emotional, psychological suffering. So that's kind of a useful, I suppose, definition of compassion as we kind of, I suppose, lean into specifically what compassion-focused therapy is and how that therapy actually works. So one of the theories, James, behind CFT is that we didn't design our brain. So if you think about, kind of what goes on in our brain and how we think, if we didn't design it, therefore it probably isn't so much our fault. So, what we're bringing together now is compassion. So this is a sense of gentle kindness towards self or others. And this other idea that actually maybe what I'm thinking isn't necessarily, or how my brain works isn't necessarily my fault. Which then brings us to this whole idea of the old brain and the new brain. So if we go right back over millennia and we think about how we as human beings have evolved and developed over thousands, millions of years, the old brain was very much about survival. So it's about food going into the mouth, shelter from the elements. And then over time, the human brain developed into what we could call the new brain, which helps us to imagine. The new brain helps us to invent and fantasize. Also kind of, would help us to reason and plan, and also this idea of ruminating, getting stuck. So we're looking at the human brain and how the human brain functions. Another idea to, I suppose, introduce here is the idea that we have inherited a whole range of difficult emotions. So what do I mean by difficult emotions? I suppose it's things like upset, anxiety, anger, disgust, those kind of difficult emotions. And then we've also inherited desires. And then we want to think about, the brain is shaped by our environment and those around us. So introducing another concept, which maybe your listeners will be familiar with, we go right back to when we're babies. Being held, being nurtured, being cared for, being touched. All of that is absolutely essential for the human brain to develop in a healthy, functioning way. So we know that for sure now, that newborn babies and young babies, they need to be held, touched, loved and cared for. And when that doesn't happen, we know that has effects, negative effects on how the brain develops. So when we consider all of that, then we can train our mind to maximize our chances of understanding and coping with unpleasant emotions to increase helpful and pleasant thoughts and feelings. So, this is the idea that actually we can work on ourselves, that we can retrain our minds to manage emotions in a different way. And one of those ways is through this idea of compassion-focused therapy. How does all that sound? Am I throwing a lot at you now?
No, I'm keeping up. I'm keeping up. No, it's just fascinating.
Okay.
It's fascinating. Yeah, it's a good insight.
Okay,
It's
great
a good
stuff.
insight, yeah.
So I want you to imagine now that from compassion-focused therapy, there is proposed a model of our emotional regulation system. So, and it's made up of 3 circles. So I want you to visualize now, and for your listeners who are tuning in today, to imagine 3 circles. So one is called drive, and we could put the colour on that of blue. The other is threat, so we put the colour red there. And then the other circle is soothing. So let's put green on that particular circle. So right now I want you to imagine those 3 circles. You have the drive circle, you have the threat circle, and the soothing circle. And so those, we need all 3, James, in order for us to be emotionally well and to be able to kind of function and do well in the world. All of those systems need to be operational. And we're only ever in one of them at any given time. So in any moment, we're going to be either in drive, we're going to be in threat or soothing. So for example, as I was thinking about coming on your podcast today, there was a slight element of threat because I was thinking, oh my God, what if I mess up? What if I get something wrong? What if I go blank? So that's my threat system kicking in. But as I'm here with you now, I notice actually I don't feel threatened at all. I'm probably in my drive system. So my drive system is helping me to pay attention to the questions you're asking me and for me to formulate my answers. So actually I'm in drive at the moment. So let's start with that. So our drive system is that system that helps us all get up in the morning. So let's think about, we get up tomorrow morning, we're all going to work, or maybe you're going to college or school. We need the drive system to get us organized. So we'd be thinking, what do we need to bring today? Get dressed, get showered, and off we go. Then we get stuck in traffic. So let's just imagine the M50 in Dublin, bumper to bumper traffic, and I have a meeting at 9 a.m. and it's now 9:15. Guess what system I'm now going to be in? Most likely the threat system. So I've gone from drive to I'm going to get to work and get into that meeting. Now I'm going to be in the threat system because I'm going to be late for that meeting and I'm going to be in big trouble because I'm not there. So there's the threat system. The threat system is really about protection. So we need that system to keep us safe in the world. The feelings associated with the threat system would be, for example, anxiety, anger, and disgust. So the purpose of the threat system, it's detecting threats, helping us to protect ourselves and rather be safe than sorry. So another example of going into the threat system might be, we're coming home late at night on the bus, we get off the bus, we notice somebody's following us. Straight away, our threat system is going to be activated there. We're looking around to see, is there someone that can give me help if this person's going to attack me or mug me? So that's our threat system. And that keeps us safe in the world. And then the third system is the soothing system. And that's the system that's associated with safety, being protected, being cared for, being trusted, love. So that helps us to manage distress and it promotes our well-being. So that's our soothing system. So I often think about, this idea of charging ourselves up, almost like a mobile phone, mobile phones are absolutely fantastic, right? As long as they've got a little bit of charge in them. And our soothing system is the same. We need to be charged up. We need to make sure that we're accessing that soothing system. So we need all 3 of those. So imagine now for a second, those old milking stools. So the 3-legged stool, little wooden stool for milking. I don't know if that is an image that you can see in your head.
I think I saw it before somewhere.
A 3 little legged stool.
I saw it before somewhere,
So if one of those legs, James, is off, if they're not in proportion, then what happens? The stool is lopsided, and then it's very hard to sit on a lopsided stool. It's very uncomfortable. And it's kind of similar with our 3-circle model of the emotional regulation system. We need all 3 circles in equal measure. But guess what? We're all living in the real world, and that means that can be a little bit of a challenge to have all of those 3 circles in equal proportion. So one of the things I might do with a client, and when we're working maybe from a compassion-focused therapy perspective, would be I would say to somebody, okay, get out a piece of paper, grab a pen, and I want you to draw your 3 circles. So based on the week that you've just had, I want you to draw those 3 circles, and I want you to draw them in proportion to how often or how much were you in the drive circle. How often this week were you in the threat circle? And how often this week were you in the soothing circle? And this is a way to help people to tune into how am I doing? What's really going on with me? And it can be fascinating when you do that exercise because you might notice, God, my drive circle is quite big. The threat circle is quite big, but the soothing circle is actually significantly smaller.
Yeah.
And that then is beginning to paint a picture of why you might be feeling what you're feeling in any given week. So anxiety, maybe low mood, feeling under pressure, not feeling great in yourself. My soothing circle is not as developed. And then that's giving us some more information about, okay, so what might I need to do to access that soothing system? So it's a lovely, simple model, James, to help people understand what they're feeling and what they're thinking. Okay.
Yeah, no,
that's the three-circle
great exercise.
Model.
Yeah,
so it might be something you can give a go, maybe during the week if you get a chance.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about it now.
Do that, yeah.
Like, why is that circle empty?
There we go. There we go.
Yeah.
And what gives us soothing? Because it's different for each of us. Each of us will, access soothing in a different way.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Great. That probably bring us to the next question, which is, why do we struggle with compassion?
Well, it's a very good question. Why do we struggle with compassion? I suppose there are various factors to that, James. First of all, let's think about kind of growing up in our families of origin. And what were the messages around being kind to ourselves and giving ourselves a chance and kind of nurturing ourselves first and foremost? What were those messages? Again, some of your listeners may not have thought of it in that way. So we may have developed a strong internal critic because that was the voice that we bore witness to, maybe in others. So it's kind of what is familiar to us. And then culturally, James, if we think about the society that we grow up in, like what are those subtle messages, whether we get that through media, through our own social connections, but what are those subtle messages that might tell us actually that we're not worthwhile, or indeed maybe that we're not deserving of compassion? So that can contribute to struggling with compassion. Other blocks to compassion, I think I mentioned there about maybe we don't deserve it. So that's certainly something to consider. The other thing to maybe consider is when we access compassion and this sense of gentle kindness towards ourselves, sometimes that can bring up a sense of sadness. And, because sadness is a feeling that isn't very pleasant, we generally try to avoid feelings that are unpleasant. So if being compassionate with myself brings me into a sense of sadness, I may inadvertently avoid that compassionate piece. And the other piece I suppose to consider is the power of self-criticism. So again, if being self-critical is very strong in us, and it's what we're really familiar with, it's our default position, that the power to be critical overtakes the power to be compassionate towards self. So I suppose, if we think about kind of what stops us from being compassionate with ourselves, really it's us. We stop ourselves from being compassionate with ourselves.
Okay.
But again, we mightn't think of it like that. Do you know?
Yeah,
so the book stops with us. Yeah. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking like, okay, so I'm doing it to myself.
Yeah.
And but I think that.
Go ahead.
Sorry, that's one thing we would struggle with. I think we don't like to think that it's our fault.
Right.
So it's easier to say somebody's doing it to me.
Yes.
Than to say like.
Yeah. And a way of reframing that, James, might be that piece around responsibility. So is it my responsibility or is it somebody else's responsibility? And I hear what you're saying. So it can be difficult to take personal responsibility. But the good news about taking personal responsibility is that we then empower ourselves for change. So when we give our power away to people and place blame and responsibility on somebody else for our well-being or our sense of self, we're giving our power away. And really what we want to be doing to live kind of contented lives and kind of good quality of life is taking responsibility, and that means then also empowering ourselves. So just notice what happens when we reframe that to I'm going to take responsibility for myself. We're actually empowered to make choices that are right for us and not give our power away to somebody else.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Brilliant. Next question.
Okay.
Hi, Ciarán. What advice can you give to someone who believes that self-criticism works for them? Okay,
so that's kind of a different spin on it, isn't it, James? What you're asking there, does self-criticism work for us? Well, look, first of all, I would say if something is working for you and you're quite content with that, then great. If it isn't broken, then we don't need to fix it. So, that would be kind of the first thing that comes to mind for me. However, I would kind of challenge that idea. So sometimes people will tell themselves that being hard on themselves helps them to achieve or get the work done or be successful. But I would ask kind of what price comes with that. So, I would ask if there might be a gentler way to engage in your life. So maybe it just doesn't need to be so hard. So there's always a price for these things. So I hear what you're asking, like, for the person who says self-criticism works for me. I suppose I was saying, but does it really? And let's look at kind of what's the toll that would take on you over time. So I don't know. But
the long-term effect could be more negative than what you think is working now. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a really good point. So what are the long-term effects of things? Absolutely, for sure. And then again, you're thinking about what does it take out of me when I'm being very self-critical and being negative towards myself? What does that do to my spirit? Like, what does that do to my sense of self? And, what we're really looking at here is our relationship with ourselves. So what kind of relationship am I having with myself if I operate from a place of self-criticism, or indeed may I introduce that idea of self-loathing, the real disliking of myself? So what kind of relationship could I have with myself if that's the bedrock of my relationship with self? So, there's something to really reflect on there, I think.
Yeah. Thank you. My next question. Hi, Ciarán. Sorry, I need some water. Okay. This question, quite similar to the last one. So, why? Sorry. Let me start again. Why do I speak to myself in a critical way?
Why do we speak to ourselves in a critical way? I guess, James, it's probably because it's what we've learned. So again, if we think about our environment and think about how we grew up and the messages that we hear growing up, so most likely it's what we've learned. Maybe we learned it in school. Maybe it was a teacher who was less than, kind or less than nurturing or supportive. And so maybe it's familiar. And we generally tend to gravitate towards what is familiar. So what is our default? So often what is familiar represents safety. And when I talk about safety, I'm talking about psychological safety. So what gives me a sense of security in myself, and what is not threatening. So, why do I speak to myself in a critical way? It's what I've learned. And the good news there, James, is that we can relearn. So we can relearn and we can do it differently. So I think that's the good news on that.
Yeah.
And of course, noticing it, James. So that's important too. So am I tuned into myself? Am I self-aware? What is my insight like? Am I noticing how I'm speaking to myself or how I'm thinking? And does that hold me up and honor me, or does that tear me down? And, is it destructive? So they're the kind of questions now I'd like your listeners to be thinking as they're listening into our conversation today, to really be thinking about that. What is my relationship with myself really like? And that requires us to get still, take a couple of breaths, tune in. Do I like myself? Do I love myself? Those deeper questions.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking of exercises I have to do now.
Okay. You've got a busy day ahead, so.
Yeah. The next question, how does my mind trying to protect me or help me by criticizing me?
Yeah, so the protect is the interesting part of that question there. So, how is your mind trying to protect yourself by criticizing you? So yes, you could argue that your mind is trying to protect you. And maybe it's around this idea that if I criticize myself first, then when someone else criticizes me, it just won't hurt as much. So the flaw now in that thought process, James, is that, what if nobody is actually criticizing you? So we're preempting the criticism. So I'll do it to myself first, so it doesn't hurt so much when you do it to me. But what if you're not criticizing me? What if you're never going to criticize me? Then I'm doing this to myself, and that is going to have an impact over time in terms of my mental health and my well-being. And again, it's remembering there might be an easier, gentler and kinder way for me to protect myself. It may not have to be in such a self-critical way. So again, thinking about the long-term impacts of that on my sense of self. So again, looking at low self-confidence, low self-esteem, low self-worth, and, maybe anxiety and difficulties with mood. So that's maybe why we don't want to be in self-criticism in the long term.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I'm just thinking so many things at the moment.
Okay.
Sorry, next question. And hi, Ciarán. How does we say CFT work with grief, especially complex grief?
Okay. So grief we could describe as a psychological pain. And CFT is just one way, James, to understand your grief. So if I'm in physical pain, for example, let's say I broke my leg, CFT would probably be about, going to see a doctor, maybe having to get a cast on, resting the leg by not walking on it. And then when the cast comes off, you might actually get some extra help, maybe go and see a physiotherapist to ensure that you're giving your leg the best possible chance of recovery. So that's with physical pain. But what about emotional pain and emotional wounding, like grief, as you've asked there? So CFT would encourage you to be gentle with yourself, to be kind to yourself in that grief and that pain, and to give yourself a break, and to allow yourself to be with your grief without any unhelpful, intrusive thoughts like, well, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or a thought like, I shouldn't be crying at this point in my grief recovery. So CFT would probably say to you, so you are where you are, and your grief is what it is. And how can you support yourself in this grief? How can you mind yourself and be kinder to yourself in this grief, rather than the criticism of I shouldn't be feeling like this, or I should be over this by now, which sounds very harsh and it isn't very self-supporting. So that's where I think kind of CFT can be quite helpful when it comes to something like complex grief. It's about how we lean into the grief and how we deal and process the grief. And what story am I telling myself here? So again, that's something I would work a lot with my client base around kind of what is the story you're telling yourself? And is that story helpful and useful in whatever the situation is, or does it pull you down? Is it destructive? And so why are you choosing then a story that's destructive as opposed to a story that might be helpful and supportive? So again, lots more food for thought there and lots more self-reflection.
Yeah, Jesus, I can almost see myself in every question I'm asking.
Really? You're relating a lot to it? Yeah, because these are all things that everybody would relate to. I mean, any of us having, experiencing human life at the moment, we're all going to be faced with these various questions. And life is a little bit more vibrant, James, I think, and it's a little lighter when we can engage, with ourselves in this way, when we can ask these deeper questions of ourselves and not just go through the motions of things. Do you know, like the idea of life and being on the hamster wheel? So we're just going around and around and around. When we stop for a second and say, hold on a minute, like what's going on with me? What kind of lifts me up? What kind of motivates me? What is the reason for me getting up out of bed in the morning and engaging in my life? What is the quality of my life? And so the quality of my life and how I gauge that, James, will be different to how you gauge your quality of life. But it's very useful to tune into that and ask yourself, kind of what are the components or the facets of my life that kind of make it worthwhile and make me want to get up and get stuck into life every day? What's important to me? And I think about that from the perspective of kind of consciously tuning into ourselves, stopping for a second, stop the hamster wheel, get off the treadmill of life, and really take stock and do a bit of a review. That for some people can be a little bit intimidating, but when you do it in a supportive way, and maybe through counselling and therapy, you do that with a counsellor or therapist, it can be really, really, can be awesome, to be honest, and really worthwhile. Of course, I would say that as a therapist myself, because I believe in engaging in life in this way, and kind of, it's just more colourful and vibrant.
Yeah, I think that's how we kind of get the juices of life.
Exactly.
If we lean into it, into ourselves. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you very much. My next question. Hi, Ciarán. how do I work with compassion, with shame?
Okay, so you're talking about how do we deal with shame in a compassionate way, right? So when I think about shame, James, it's really shame is about who we are. When we think about guilt, guilt is often associated with kind of what we do or what we've done. Shame goes to the core of who I am fundamentally as a person. So, for example, like shame may be rooted in, as a person, am I flawed? Am I wrong? Am I bad? Am I unlovable? It's very useful to process shame, needless to say, to challenge it and reflect on it. You can ask yourself, what is this feeling of shame really about? So again, back to what we said a moment ago, getting still in yourself, notice what's coming up, ask yourself, what is it really about? So when we add compassion into the mix, we're essentially exploring our shame through a lens of gentle kindness. So again, we're going to do it through kindness rather than tearing ourselves apart. So shame is often murky, can be dark, frightening. By adding compassion into the mix, we're throwing some light into the situation. We're taking our breath, being still and gentle, and exploring what the shame is really about. And you might just discover that the shame is not yours. So often we carry things that don't belong to us, psychologically speaking. So it may have been placed on us. You know, it's a story we're told about who we are, but actually when we really challenge that story, we find out, no, hold on a minute, I'm not that person. This is who I am. Yeah, so, you know, and that's something that comes up, again, in my clinical work. People who come to me and will share and talk about stories that they have told themselves over many years about who they thought they were. But as we begin to unpack it and peel back the onion, you know, the layers of the onion, people discover, actually, hold on a minute, this isn't my shame. I've carried shame, but it doesn't belong with me. In order to get to that point of seeing that actually this shame doesn't belong with me, compassion and being gentle and kind with yourself is a great vehicle to that place. So when you're kind and you allow yourself the time and you allow yourself to reflect on what's really going on, and in a kind and gentle way, getting to that point of actually, you know, this shame isn't mine, and now I can hand it back to wherever it needs to be handed back to, or I can release it, can be an extremely powerful process.
Yeah, I think we do that quite a lot with ourselves. We carry stories that we've been told at a young age or whatever, and
absolutely,
because we've been told a story and we believe the story, we think it's our story.
We adopt it. Yeah. And then, you know, over time, as we mature and we become adults or various other life experiences happen, it then can challenge that story that we've told ourselves. And that might be a bad thing. You know, sometimes it's good to kind of, for us to be challenged and for us to stop and ask ourselves, actually, is there a different way here? Can I think differently about this? Can I choose something different for myself? Very powerful when we can land into that.
Yeah. Thank you. Next question, mine. And hi, Ciarán. How do we stop comparing ourselves with others in terms of like position, status, looks? Just happens, especially in the social media world.
Yes, absolutely. And social media is rampant with that, isn't it? You know, so often if we think about like, what is that about, this comparing ourselves? So one of our innate human needs is to belong and to be a part of and to be accepted. And so somewhere in our psyche, we tell ourselves, in order to belong and be accepted and to be safe among our peers, we need to be the same as. And I wonder if that's where this comparing ourselves creeps in. Because if I'm not the same as, there's a vulnerability then there for me. So for me to fit in, I need to be the same as. And of course, you know, we're questioning that as a people now. We're saying, actually, do we need to be the same as, or is there a beauty and a richness in being different? But of course, being different in this world requires a bit of courage because, you know, there's a piece around that I need to belong and I need to be the same as. So I'd say, James, you know, it's really important for us to notice when that's going on. So often these things are very subtle. Often it's in the unconscious, that part of our psyche that we don't have access to. So it's playing itself out. So I need to have the fancy car because the next door neighbour got his fancy car. So I now need to have one. I need to live in the right address. I need to live in a big enough house, you know, because the peers have just moved into their 4-bedroom house, so I'm not sure if I'd be actually comfortable in a 2-bed apartment because the best mate has just bought this beautiful 4-bed house. Again, it's noticing what is going on inside of us and what that is really about. So that's why I think, often we're comparing ourselves. Underneath it, the question is, am I safe in myself? Am I secure in myself? And again, your listeners right now can check in with themselves in the here and now as they're listening in today. Are you safe in yourself? Are you secure in yourself? And at the core of it, we can ask ourselves, do you like yourself? Based on where you live, or the car you drive, or the money you make, or the holidays you go on, or the restaurants you frequent. So we've got to really challenge that. Who am I at my core? And what we might discover is when we get to our core, we figure out, actually, I am not the car that I drive. I am not the house I live in. I am not the job I do. That I am actually something separate from that. And we're looking at character then. So what character am I? And hopefully that will help root you in a solid, secure sense of yourself, a sense of yourself where you like yourself, you honor yourself, you respect yourself, and you make good choices for yourself as much as you can. As humans, we make bad choices for ourselves, and that's okay. That's part of being human.
Yeah. But as adults, we like to make a lot of bad choices before we learn.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we don't really know that they're bad choices. Often we're making these choices because, again, it's what's familiar, it's what we do, it's what the people in our lives do. So I'll just do that too. But when we stop and take stock and do some reflection, do some counselling, we're really looking at ourselves and asking ourselves, do I want to live like this? Whatever the like this is. Do I want to live like this? Is this working for me? Am I happy and content? Am I pursuing my dreams? Am I holding myself back? And so the questions go on and on and on.
Yeah. So I have a lot of questions to ask myself. Okay, next question. Sorry. Hi, Ciarán. What's your view on self-care, and how does self-care relate to compassion?
Well, this is what I'm passionate about, James. Self-care, and I'm a therapist, so I'm all about self-care. And I consider myself an absolute advocate for self-care. And I think more than ever, self-care and the whole theme of self-care has come to the forefront, particularly because of the pandemic and the struggles that people have faced and are continuing to face into at the moment. It's been a really, really difficult time. And so looking after ourselves and minding ourselves in terms of our quality of life and our mental health has never been so important. Particularly in our lifetime, it's never been so important. And then let's look at the blocks to self-care, or why wouldn't I look after myself? So again, back to that piece around, am I deserving? Am I allowed to? And what does self-care look like? So again, looking at the messages that we would have heard growing up, am I allowed to look after myself, or am I going to be considered being too big for my boots, or, well, who do you think you are? So self-care is a really, really important theme, I think, for a lot of people at the moment. And, in my line of work, James, I haven't had as many inquiries ever from clients who are looking at their self-care practices and noticing where it's not where it should be. So people get caught on the treadmill of work. I think initially, when people were working from home and working remotely because of the pandemic, there was this feeling of, oh, sure, that's going to be dead easy. Sure, that's dead easy. I'll just be at home. Fantastic. But actually, what I'm hearing anecdotally, I suppose, from my client base is that it's been quite isolating. It's been very difficult to disengage in work, to shut the laptop down, to come away, to not check that email, and to get caught in this loop of constantly being triggered and being switched on to work and the everyday demands of life. And so if that's what's happening in your life, then you certainly need to be tuning into self-care. And what do your self-care practices look like? So what is that? For some people, it's going for a massage once a month. For somebody else, it's meeting up with a friend and going for the forest walk. For somebody else, the dip in the sea. These things don't have to cost money. They really don't. It can be, opening up your favourite book and just reading a chapter of it, watching a favourite movie, cooking a favourite meal, but consciously doing it, telling yourself at the time, I'm doing this for me. or I need to
Yes.
recharge my battery. Or what was it that guy was saying about the 3 circles and that soothing circle? What is it that I'm doing that contributes to my soothing circle, to filling myself up? And it's so important that we know what those practices are. And again, I'm meeting lots of people, and I know this myself in my own life, where I know the practices that are good for me. And then I just catch myself for a moment, go, you know, I haven't gone for that massage in a while, or I haven't had the reflexology session, or I haven't seen that friend, or I haven't taken the break, or I haven't given myself the day off. You know, so we can catch it, and that's okay. So when we come at it from a compassionate perspective, we're not beating ourselves up about it. We're noticing it.
No.
We're stopping for a second. We're saying, okay, so what small thing can I do today that will contribute to some self-care? And it's so important because when our cup goes empty, there is nothing left for us to give away. So whether that's showing up at work, showing up in an intimate romantic relationship, showing up in friendships, very difficult when our cup is empty. So we're all allowed to, it's our birthright. We are allowed to fill our own cup up first, dare I say. Fill our own cup up first.
It might sound selfish, but it's not.
No, and even if it is selfish, I mean, I like to use the word self-full. So let's just forget about selfish for a second here and introduce this word of self-full, filling myself up first. And then, you know, again, anybody listening in today, to notice, what does that trigger? The idea of filling my own cup up first. What might get triggered is, no, but what I learned and what I was told was always be of service to others first. Always give first. And so that was the story. That was the theme. That was maybe family of origin stuff. So always give of myself and give everything away first. And then if there's any drop left, then maybe then I'm allowed to have a little drop from the cup if there's one left. And I don't, you know, buy into that. I believe that we cannot be of service. We cannot give to others. We cannot show up healthily in relationships unless we are full ourselves. And then when our cup is full, it runneth over, and then we can give till our heart's content. But we must make sure our battery is recharged. We must do that first.
Totally.
So that might be a new story for some of your listeners today.
Yeah, no. Thanks. Sorry, my mind was just thinking like so many things.
It's bringing up a lot for you today, James.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's okay. So just notice it. I'd say to you to notice what's coming up. You don't have to say what it is, but you just notice what's coming up. You put it into your imaginary filing cabinet, and then you can open up that filing cabinet during the week when you get a chance, maybe when you're doing your self-care piece, and look at kind of, you know, what is coming up and what is that about for you, and begin to unpack that a little bit for yourself. And what you might notice is that you want to try something a little different, or you might want to think about yourself in a different way, or introduce self-care practice that maybe has kind of gone by the wayside a little bit. But again, do it with loving kindness. It's not about blame. It's not about criticizing yourself. It's not about getting it wrong. It's about nurturing yourself and holding yourself up and saying, yeah, I'm human. I'm human. I'm doing the best I can here. And that needs to be enough. Just is enough. And that's okay.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Next question. Sorry, Ciarán. Can self-compassion be an antidote for more personal suffering?
Absolutely. So the question you're asking is, can being kinder and gentler and nicer to myself help in my personal suffering? And the answer is absolutely yes, it can. So, you know, another way of, let's flip that question and say, you know, does being hard on myself and criticizing myself and tearing myself apart, does that help with my suffering? No, it doesn't. It just contributes and adds more to suffering. It's just more suffering. It's just suffering upon layer of suffering upon layer of suffering. So absolutely, James, a little bit of gentle kindness in your suffering, for sure, can go a really, really long way. And, you know, you mentioned the word suffering, and it's come up, obviously, in our talk today. Suffering is part of the human experience. It is, there's no getting away from it. I don't know anybody, and I haven't met anybody so far in my 45 years on the planet, who doesn't know suffering to some degree or other. Now, we won't get into comparing suffering, because that's a whole other conversation. But we all know what suffering is, because we are all human. So it is an innate normal, natural human experience, and there is no getting away from it. Now, we're very, very clever animals as human beings, and we'll do everything under the sun to avoid suffering. And we know what that is. We just think ourselves. Again, I'm going to invite your listeners to tune into what do I do to numb my pain and numb my suffering. So one person, it's the online shopping. Somebody else, it's knocking back drinks. Somebody else, it's recreational drugs. Somebody else, it's food. Somebody else, it's sex. So what do I do to alleviate the suffering? Now, I've said alleviate, but actually those things I've just mentioned is about numbing it. So it actually doesn't do anything to the suffering other than just numb it for a period of time. To alleviate it, we have to process it. So suffering, pain, we have to process it. It means we have to feel it. We have to understand it. We have to go into it and then come out the other end. And that's where counselling and psychotherapy is really, really useful, because you can explore your suffering, explore your pain, understand it, really feel it, and work your way through it. The only way to deal with pain and suffering is to process it and work through it and come out the other end. So there's a saying, what do I do when I find myself in pain and suffering? And the answer is keep going. Keep going down into it until you come out the other side. As soon as we block it, as soon as we numb it, that's all we're doing. We're freezing it. And then, we freeze it for a period of time. We find something that numbs it. And then we find over time that we need to do more of that thing because actually it's not as effective. So I need more alcohol, or I need more drugs, or I need more food, or I need more sugar, or more sex to numb it for a little bit longer. But then, of course, it becomes unstuck again, and then I have to feel it. And so the cycle goes on. So back to your original question, can being kinder to myself, giving myself a chance, could that help with suffering? Absolutely. Because in being kinder with yourself, you might just choose something that will help to process the suffering. That could be talking to a friend. It could be going to see a counsellor or therapist to work through it. It could be just giving yourself a break. It could be just being with the pain. So I'm going to be kinder. I'm just going to allow myself to feel it. Imagine, I'm just going to feel the pain rather than block it and numb it. I'm just going to allow myself, even though it isn't nice in the moment, but that's okay. It's not nice. It is very unpleasant. That's why we call it pain and suffering. But it doesn't last. When we process it, what does processing mean? It means working through. So we're going to work through it. Can I give myself that? Can I allow myself that? Rather than numb and block it. And that is the $1 million question that all of us get to face. And I would say on a fairly regular basis. Can I allow myself to process as opposed to just stay stuck in it? And it's back to relationship with self. Do I love myself enough and respect myself enough to work through this pain?
Yeah,
so that's a very long-winded answer to your question, James.
No, thank you. Jesus, I have so much stuff to think about. Okay, my next question. Hi, Ciarán. How can I start practicing self-compassion?
Well, compassion is about being kinder to yourself, James. So it could start with the voice inside your head. What does that voice tell you about who you are? So it's about, again, taking your breath, tune in to it, notice what you're telling yourself, do some reflection. How do I treat myself? How do I speak to myself? Notice your thought process, because that's so important when working with compassion. Another way, in terms of the kind of practicing self-compassion from a practical perspective is do some journaling. There's online journals now that people can access. You can buy guided journals where there's actual questions, or you can just buy a very simple notebook, nothing fancy, and start to collect and record your thoughts and then begin to challenge them. So that's a great way to start with self-compassion. The other piece of work then would be around meditation. And on YouTube, you can type in any number of kind of keywords to bring you to meditation, and particularly around compassion-focused therapy. There are a couple of exercises. One is called soothing rhythm breathing. You can type that into YouTube, and that will bring up a number of guided meditations around soothing rhythm breathing. It is a guided meditation that helps one to tune into just your breath. And the point of the exercise is not so much for it to be relaxing and calming, although I think that's a byproduct of it, and that's a nice one. But soothing rhythm breathing is about noticing the thoughts. It
Yes.
sounds so simple,
Yeah.
James. It's actually, it can be a bit of a challenge because we're so stimulated all of the time between mobile phones and devices and televisions and people, we're constantly stimulated. But being able to sit just for 5 minutes and notice what are the thoughts that are coming up for me. And so you can do a soothing rhythm breathing guided meditation. As I say, there's plenty of them on YouTube. 5 minutes,
Yes,
10 minutes.
yes.
Do that every day. You'll be amazed at the impact that will have on your mental health and your well-being, because you're nurturing and developing your relationship itself, because you are being with yourself. There's less distraction. So when we are fostering and nurturing any relationship, it's about being with the person or people that we're fostering that relationship with. So we must be with ourselves. Again, that might sound odd when we say it out loud. What do you mean being with myself? It means tuning into myself. It means, what are you thinking? What are you telling yourself? What choices are you making? Are they uplifting? Are they healthy? Are they good for you? Or again, are they destructive? Are they unhelpful? And your job is to notice the difference. So meditation can be very useful for that, because it really gets one to be still. So there's some examples, James, of how you can start with the self-compassion. The other one, again, it's kind of a simple enough one. But you get a little post-it note, and very simple statement on the post-it note: I am enough. So just imagine on this post-it note, you write with a marker, I am enough, just as I am. So I am enough. And you literally pin that to the mirror in your bedroom. So every time you're in your bedroom and you glance, you're in and out, or you're getting up in the morning, you see the post-it note, I am enough. Very powerful. Particularly for the person who's operating from a place of, I am not enough. They don't even know it.
Yes.
They don't even know it. So again, that's another very simple, practical exercise that you can do to start to love yourself and nurture yourself, and start to tune into, what am I telling myself up here in my psyche?
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. My next question is, how can I be a nurturing parent to myself?
How can I be a nurturing parent to myself? Wow. Okay. So when you ask that question, I'm thinking about reparenting, and what comes up for me, James, is the idea of that inner child. So each of us as adults, what we're carrying inside of us is an inner child, from a psychological perspective. So our younger selves. So imagine your younger self inside of you now for a moment. And again, I'm going to invite your listeners to imagine this younger part of themselves inside. So how does that younger part of yourself create a sense of safety and support and loving kindness towards itself? So the inner child, how does it create safety for itself? So again, in my work, I'm meeting lots of people who are operating out of a wounded inner child. So it's that younger part of ourselves that got wounded, and we're acting out of that and not our adult selves. So if we can love that inner child by connecting with him, and you'd say to him or her, you're okay. We're okay. We've got this. So James, your adult self would talk to your inner child self, and you'd let him know that he's safe, that he's okay. So he may be threatened, he may feel triggered, he may be activated, because in the here and now in your adult life, something is activating the wounded inner child. So you just let him know, again, it's just in your mind. You just speak to him and say, look, it's okay. I'm going into this meeting, or maybe you're going into an interview, and, you might be slightly activated, or you might be a little bit anxious about how it's going to go. My guess is that's your inner child actually who's acting out, who's saying, oh, I don't know if this is safe. What if I make a mistake? What if I mess up? But actually, you as an adult who is in charge of yourself can say, actually, no, everything's good here. So you let the inner child know everything's good, everything's fine. I have this. You don't need to be anxious or concerned or upset. I have this. So that's one way of you kind of beginning to reparent yourself. And reparenting yourself brings up what I didn't get when I was younger. So what my parents weren't able to give me. And can I give that to myself now as an adult? Am I allowed to? Am I allowed to give myself that, whatever it might be? Confidence. Can I give myself the permission to really like and love myself? Can I tell myself that I'm successful? Can I believe it? Can I tell myself as an adult that I can be whoever I want to be in the world? And can I believe that? So that's kind of one way to do the reparenting from a compassionate perspective.
Yes, yeah. More work for me to do.
There's always work, James. We all have work to do, and it never ends. Until we take our last breath, there is always work to be done.
The work continues.
The work continues.
Continues, yeah. My last two questions. 15. How can I treat... Sorry, some water. So I have a cough that I can't seem to get rid of.
Okay.
Hi, Ciarán. How can I try to treat my friend or loved one if they're struggling? What can I try to do for them?
I think that's a really great question, James, because we all know people who are struggling at the moment and maybe who aren't coping as well as they could. That can be very triggering for us when someone we love and someone we care about isn't doing well. You know, we want to be supportive. We want to help in any way that we can. And it can be really difficult to know what to do. Very simply, I would say be present. Now, what does that mean?
Okay.
Be present. It means show up. It means let the person you love who's struggling know that you're there for them. So rather than forcing yourself on them and trying lots of different things, you could just simply ask them, like, how can I help you right now? How can I be supportive of you right now? And it might be, again, the being present means, do you want to go for the walk? Do you want to go for coffee? Do you want to go for lunch? Know that I'm here, no matter what you're feeling, no matter what you're thinking, no matter what's going on inside of you, I'm here for you. And it's reminding your loved one of that. So it's the showing up and being present. You may not have to do anything. So it mightn't involve the doing of anything, but it's the letting them know they're not on their own, that they're not isolated, that they don't have to go through the pain by themselves. And while it is their pain and it is their path through it, you can be on a parallel path and you can walk alongside that person.
Yes.
Obviously, there are different degrees of pain and suffering, there's different degrees to it. So, if you feel someone is a harm to themselves or a risk to themselves, it is about involving maybe professionals. It is about speaking to close family members and getting people maybe the appropriate supports that they need. But generally speaking, it's about being present and being there for the person and just letting them know that. So it's the odd text message, isn't it? To kind of say, listen, how you doing today? I'm here. If you want to chat, if you want to go for a walk, if you want to hang out, I'm here. So that's kind of, that would be my suggestion. The other thing that came up for me there, James, is around, I'm thinking about this now from an adult perspective, but the idea of play and the idea of fun, adventure, creativity. So what we know today is that, as adults, we need play and fun and creativity just as much as we needed it as children. So again, I'm going to invite your listeners to be thinking about, what do I do in my life that involves fun and play? Now, for some people, it's sport, and other people, it's particular clubs, and all that kind of stuff, which is great. But it is very useful to know, what do I do that gives me an outlet for play and creativity and fun, in whatever way that looks like? And if you find that actually there isn't any fun or play or creativity in my life, then I'd be asking you to assess your quality of life. I'd be asking you to really challenge yourself around, what does that feel like? Again, are we allowed to have fun? Are we allowed to have play as adults? I would argue, absolutely. I would argue that it's actually essential that we have fun, that we have timeouts, that we can somehow access our creativity. So, you're running this wonderful podcast, and I'm guessing that this is part of your creative outlet for you in terms of your quality of life. That's just a guess now, James.
Hobby,
It's a hobby, So it's a fantastic hobby. So again, I'm going to ask your listeners to really ask themselves, what do I do for fun? When was the last time I had a bit of fun? And particularly at this time when we have been restricted in what we can access around fun. So, we might have gone to play tennis or golf or soccer, and some things haven't been happening because of restrictions and lockdowns, etc. That's really tough. That's really difficult. So what am I going to do then? If I can't do A, what's B going to look like? There needs to be something. So just to keep that in mind for your friends and also for yourself in terms of quality of life.
Okay. Brilliant, Ciarán. My last question, I don't know if I had it on the sheet, but
Okay.
question 17, did I send you that? I'm not sure. Yeah. So my last question is, what do you think is the greatest opportunity of CFT has in today's world?
Okay, so that's like, the big finale question, James. I feel like the drum is going. Very simply, compassion-focused therapy is about being kinder to oneself. It's about accessing your soothing system. We talked about the drive, the threat, and the soothing system. So compassion-focused therapy is about consciously accessing a soothing, nurturing, loving, caring system that is inside of you. It's innately in there. So compassion-focused therapy does what it says on the tin, very simply. It's about gentle, loving kindness. We know a simple act of kindness to others can have a significant ripple effect. So let the simple act of kindness start with how you relate to yourself. When you get up out of the bed of a morning, put your feet on the ground, take a couple of seconds of a deep breath, and consciously tell yourself, today is a good day. And then see what happens. And that, James, has to have an impact on the world, because it starts with our individual world, and then we go out into the larger world and we bring that energy with us. So simple act of kindness towards self, and then from there you spring forward into your life and out into the world.
Yeah.
Carry
Brilliant.
that kindness with you. That has to have an impact.
Yeah. It does, definitely. If you wake up with that mind frame and you go out with it, you notice different things, and you're nicer to people, which is always great, and that could have a ripple effect.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you today, James. I hope some of that has been useful for your listeners.
Useful for me as well. Yeah.
Useful for you and useful for your listenership. Yeah. And if there's one takeaway from it, it really is that piece around, can I find a little bit of kindness inside of myself for myself? And when I do, what does that translate into in terms of something tangible in your life? So I'm hoping it'll be a little bit of food for thought for everybody today, and wishing you all the very best.
No, definitely.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. And where can people find you?
So people can find me. I'm on Instagram. It's #counselling_ with Ciarán.
Yeah.
And then I'm in Dublin. I work out of the Healing House. So you can go to the website, www.thehealinghouse.ie, and under counsellors there, you'll find me, Ciarán Nolan. My contact details are there. And, people might contact the podcast. You can pass on my email address, which is ciarannolan@hotmail.com. Very simple. CIARAN, Ciarán Nolan, NOLAN @hotmail.com.
Fantastic. And my last question is, I'll let you go after this. What does Ciarán do for fun?
What do I do for fun? Well, I'm a bit of a theatre goer, so I was delighted to get back for the first time after the pandemic into the theatre last week. And I love working out. So I'm a bit of a gym bunny, so I try and get into the gym a couple of mornings a week, where I have my friends, my gym bunnies, I call them. So there's as much a social scene there for me, James, as there is the actual, just the physical well-being, just the physical working out, which I find really useful for my own mental health. But you know what? It's the laughter and the bit of crack and the coffee afterwards, and maybe a pan au chocolat, because, we have to treat ourselves every now and again. That for me is certainly one way that I access my fun factor.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Lovely.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you for joining us today. Oh, sorry. Cut.
It's okay, James. Take your time. It's just too casual. It'd be casual, fun kind of a conversation.
Yeah. Once we get going, I'm good. It just at the start.
The intro. Yeah.
Yeah. I really need to pre-record it or something.
Oh yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for joining us today. If you're listening, oh my God, what is wrong with me? Okay, I have it now. Third time.
If you enjoyed today's episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a quick review on my Facebook page, Don't Be Afraid to Talk, or DM me on Instagram. The show notes will include all of the relevant links from today's episode. If you haven't already, please download, leave a rating, and share with your friends. You might just reach that person who needs to hear this message. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. I am James Lumumba, signing off with gratitude.